Oh, a year or two now. Yes.
Right, all ready then?
Mm-hmm.
So if you can tell me your name, where and when you were born.
My name is Dennis Grugan, aged 87. Anything else you want to know?
Where were you born?
Where was I born? I was born at Blanchland. I have something written down about, this is before the war, so that it gives you an idea of how my life had to deal with problems and things since. So, but it is before the war, but it's just the build-up of the family. So I'll give you an idea what I've got. My father worked in the coal mines in 1926, I think, when the big strike was on. And so he wanted work, so quite a few of them moved to Blanchland and worked in the lead mines. And the owners of the mines were trying to get more lead out, and they stopped damping the dust, so that the miners then got the lead dust on their lungs. And there was 12 of them died with this lead dust. I think my father was the last, and he was 32-year-old. And so my mother was left with my younger brother and I, which I think I would be, coming up for 3-year-old, I think. Yes. My brother would be about 18 months. And so my mother decided to take the mines to court and sue them, you see. So she took them to court, and my brother and I were awarded a small amount of money each week until we were 14. As soon as we worked, it was finished, which helped because my mother only had 10 shillings a week as a widow. Widow's pension was that. So that really we had to move from Blanchland because the house rent was put right up and it was quite high. I don't know what it was, but it was meaning that we needed a cottage with a lower rent. So we moved back to Edmundbyers, where my mother was born. And her mother, or her father and mother, had a small holding. And the photograph of the farm is on the photograph, which I'll explain later. So we were near to the grandmother and my mother's sister. So we moved to Edmundbyers, as I said, and we got a house there which the rent was 7 shillings and 6pence, which left my mother with 2 and 6, and plus I never knew how much compensation that she got for my brother and I. I don't think it could be much. So really times were hard from then until we were working. I went to a little school at Edmundbyers where there was 12 people, pupils altogether. And I don't think there was there wasn't anyone the same age. They went right from 5 or whatever it was to school leaving age. So the teacher had a job that she had to go through them all, you see. And then when war broke out, I remember we were fitted with gas masks. I've got a photograph of myself with a gas mask across. And it was issued in a cardboard box. And it's just a piece of string. So you can imagine how long the cardboard box was going to last at school. So then everybody started to buy a tin one. It was about such and such, and it just went in, and you could drop it and kick it and do anything with it after that. Yes, we all had to have an identity disc on you, and it's a small one on there, less the, can you see the little on the, have you got it? Yeah, that's mine. Without the strap, of course, because it deteriorated, but it's been so well worn, you will be able to make my name and registration number, which I've never forgotten. It's like my army number. It's FHVB 392. So if anything happened to you, they had you, and they could just info. At the small school at Edmundbyers, it wasn't just, lessons weren't just straightforward. I've written down here, we were taught how to cook your own meal. So the headmistress would say, you bring potatoes, you bring carrots, such and such, and we would make a broth if it was a cold day. So that was a lesson. Another one was we all had to learn to knit squares, and they were all sewn together and sent to make a blanket or for the troops. Now then, it was difficult being 5-year-old and trying to learn to knit, but I've never forgotten in, over, through, off. That must be how you knit. Do you know how to do it? Yes, well, it's in, over, through, off. And then anyway, that was another lesson. And there was all the other practical lessons as well as your history. And if it was a fine day, at the back of the school was a field that belonged on the bank side, and we would go up on there and sit and do our lessons up there, or various things. And the school closed down, and we were sent to a school at Bentfield side. Do you know Concert, or Bentfield side, Concert, Shotley Bridge area? It was a very large school. There was 32 in a class. So you've got an idea. There was a lot, and there was a senior and middle school and infant school. So it covered a big area. But the thing was, we were sent from the quiet little village to an area like that, and we were right at the foot constant steelworks, so that if the Germans were going to bomb, they were going to hit Benfield side as well. So after we'd been at that school, for 1 year, they couldn't understand why each of us were 1 year ahead of all the class. Each class is all, the seniors were ahead. And eventually they solved it by, I would be sitting in the desk here and someone would be here. I remember a cousin of mine, 2 years younger, and it went all the way up. So, excuse me, the teacher would start at the oldest one, and she would be talking to her or him and giving them lessons, and we were all listening to what she was saying, and then she would come down and down, and then as she got to me, probably the youngest one was listening what she was saying to me. So we were leapfrogging all the way through until we were all a year ahead, which was strange. When the air raid siren went for through the day, we all had to rush to these big shelters underground which held the 32 or more for the class. And if you were in the shelter longer than 20 minutes, you got a stick of barley sugar. There was, being at a big school like that, we were inclined to pick up some of the diseases that were going at the time, such as impetigo. Have you heard of impetigo? And tapeworms, which was very smittle indeed, because if you held a handrail anywhere, you could pick up these eggs, and it was chaos. And I remember being very ill with it once over, and a nurse from the First World War said to my mother, oh, you can cure that. And my mother says, well, how? Just eat raw turnip. And apparently the worms eat everything that comes into your stomach, and they nudge away at this raw turnip until and then killed them. And that was it. It cured me straight away. When the gases started to be used, we had to have a test with our gas masks. So what they did was you went into the shelter underground, but they pumped tear gas into it so that you had your gas mask on. They then said, take 2 fingers and move the side of the gas mask and just let it go back again, and let a little bit tear gas in and let you see how painful it is. And I thought, no, I'm just going to take your word for it. I'll take your word for it. My mask's working all right. I don't know how many else did, but never mind. My grandmother, who was a widow, she was on a small farm at Edmundbyers. It was sort of 6 fields to it and moorland. And her and her daughter had to run it on their own. Well, my grandmother was beginning to get a little bit older, and so I had to go and sort of help on the farm. I was on it most nights, weekends, and then in the hay time, I spent a lot of time because I've got a book somewhere, it's maybe in here, a photograph, oh here, I don't know, this is the horse. Oh, it's still on. This is in Ireland, but this is exactly what work I was having to do. And this field could have been at the farm at Edmundbyers, and it's the piking of the hay. Now then, in those days, someone had to stand on the top and build it, and you had to make sure that it was built properly, otherwise the rain would go in and the hay would all thing. So it wasn't an easy job, but that was my job on the top. Sort of, my grandmother and auntie had to fork it up. And all the hay, as it dried, was to turn, as it was drying on the field, had to be turned by hand. So I used to go along with a hand rake and all round and round until you covered about 2 or 3 acres. I've got written down cleaning the byres, mowing the moors for bedding, etc. So I worked on the farm quite a bit. One summer, we had a field all ready to pike, and my grandmother said to me, would you ask your master if you can have a week off school for the help with the hay? And I said, oh, no, no, no. I said, if you write a letter, I'll take it to him. So I took the letter to the master and I said, it's from my grandmother, and he read it. And then off he went to see the headmaster and came back and said, yes, it was quite all right for you to have a week off. So I had that week off, and then I had the 4 weeks holiday, I think, then at school. So I had the 5 weeks, which was quite good. As money was quite scarce, as you can understand, I got a job beating on the grouse moors at Edmundbyers. And I used to go beating on it, not every Saturday in the season, but most Saturdays. And now then, when war broke out, the government said, don't stop shooting, but you can't buy cartridges because the factories needed to make the ammunition. But if they had any in stock, you can buy them up and still use them to shoot. Well, being wealthy men, they all got together and they went to the factory and said, right, we'll buy all your stock. So they had all the cartridges, so they had plenty of cartridges, so the shooting carried on. Now then, my wage was 10 shillings for one day, which was very good considering a man on agriculture over 21 got about 21 shillings a week, so I got half of his wage in one day. And my first pay, 2 or 3 days afterwards, I cycled from Edmundbyers to Shotley Bridge. My friend went with me, about 5 miles. And I bought a pair of boots for 7 shillings and 6pence. And when I got home, my mother says, "You should have paid 10 shillings for a better pair." And anyway, I thought I'd done a good deal. And then there was the food rationings, and clothes and sweets was all rationed. The food, being in a rural area, we weren't too bad because, well, my grandmother used to make butter, but we occasionally got some, but she had to sell it because she needed money for the farm. That was an income, the butter and eggs. And she used to take what they called visitors in. That was holiday makers. But when war broke out, it was restricted to who would come then, you see. So it wasn't easy. So as far as butter goes, my mother used to get fresh milk from another uncle in the village and let it stand a little bit and then skim the cream off into a jar. And when she had quite a bit, she had an old milk can. She would put it in and keep shaking and shaking, and then eventually she got butter. And so that's how we, it helps. Another recipe where you sort of got a slightly bigger meal was a scrambled egg. As you did your scrambled egg, you put a slice of crumbled up white bread. White, there was no white bread during the war, so it was just a slice of bread. Mixed it all up, and you can't tell where the egg or the bread is, and you get an extra portion. So that was how we... and then we had... I used to catch rabbits on my grandmother's farm as well, so we would have the odd rabbit. I'm not sure if she could have sold those as well. I haven't mentioned the blackouts, but everybody had to have blackouts. You strictly made sure that your windows were sealed, there had to be no lights, and even the church had to have blackouts on some of them. Some of the windows that they couldn't take them down because they were so high up in the church. So that was the blackouts. I joined the choir in my spare time. But there wasn't many of us in the choir. There was about 4 or 5, so it wasn't a great lot. But then they needed somebody to blow the church organ. And the priest said to me, would I do it? And I said, well, yes, I would do it. And I got 10 shillings a quarter, which wasn't bad, it was something for this. And I think I attended every Sunday, morning service, evening service, and blew the organ. And I can only remember one day when nobody turned up at church, and it had snowed quite heavily until nobody could really get out. So after a while the priest said, come back to the rectory and we'll have a coffee. And being a young boy, when I got in, the luxury, and I thought, oh, I'm not at ease. So I drank my coffee as quick as I could and off. A little bit about the organ. There was a big service one day, and the priest wanted me to try and get into the choir. So there was a young farm boy came to church for the first time that day. Now, unfortunately, he was slightly backward. He didn't understand things. So the priest just said to him, would you blow the organ? Yes. So I had to give him lessons in about 5 minutes what to do. And what happened was, as the organist wanted you to blow the organ, there was a little ring and a wire she pulled and went up and round and all until it got to the back, and then it went click, click. So I said, when you hear that, get up and blow the organ. Yep, he says. And so the organist started, and just before she started, click, click, and you could hear Albert boom, boom, boom with the organ, plumping it up. And she was playing away, and then the keys went click, 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 click. No air in the organ. So she kept pulling the ring again, and you could hear Albert jump up from the seat. He thought there was enough air in that he'd put in. And jump up from the seat, and then the organ would start playing again, which took us all our time to stop laughing. The army used to have exercises round about Edmundbyers, and they camped just below my grandmother's farm one night, and along the bottom, and they were practice throwing hand grenades about just a short distance away. So my friend and I thought at night time, oh, we'll pop up and see what they've been throwing these hand grenades at and what's happening. And when we were walking around, we found a one, and the pin had been pulled halfway out, and apparently the person that threw it had been nervous and hadn't pulled it right out. And then you hold the handle on the grenade and throw it, and then within so many seconds it explodes. So we thought, we better go and tell them at the army that there's a live hand grenade, because any person, any animal could have kicked it and off it would have gone. We had a job getting into the camp because there was a guard, and we said we wanted to see the sergeant. So eventually he came strutting down, sort of very bumptious sort of a man, as much as they clear off, and we said, we've found a hand grenade that's been in a pin pulled halfway through. And so he went and got an officer who came down, and he says, well, can you go and show me where it is? So we said, yes. Jump into the army vehicle, which was a grand affair for a young boy, and off we went away up. Oh, yes, he says. So we used to go at night time and watch them, maybe because we thought, well, maybe one day we'll have to do it. And so we were quite knowledgeable how to make a load of bran grun and all this sort of training, and we knew everything about it, but it was something to do. There was a scare one day where someone sighted a parachute on the moors just landing, and when they did a quick check, there was no British plane being in the district, so they assumed it was a German. So the Home Guard was called out, and the sergeant was a sniper in the First World War, and he was the type that shoot anything that was moving. So anyway, we followed them to go up and get this German, going up the hill, and he noticed we were in behind, and he said, get away home. And so we had, oh dear. Anyway, after they'd got over the top, it wasn't a parachute, it was a barrage balloon that had broken loose at Newcastle, and somebody had seen the top going along, you see. So when we found out it was a barrage balloon, we went up and helped them to get the gas out of it by climbing onto the top, everybody, and it was great fun. It was like a bouncy castle. There was a I don't know what it was called, the Red Cross during the war, but each villagers had their own Red Cross formed, and my mother was in, it was quite a few women from the village, and they wanted, to put another word for it, was a dummy. So my friend and I was asked to go, and the doctor would explain to the women how to put a splint on, slings and knots and things, all for different things. And then the women had to have a test, a written test. So I remember my mother saying to me, what do I do if the arm's broken here and something? And I would say, she would say, do I do so-and-so? And I would say, no, you do this and you do that. Oh, right. So anyway, she passed. One day, the air raid warden came around. It was just after lunch, and telling everybody to get into the house and stay there, because he said there's 200 German planes flying from north to south, and they will be over all our area, and don't come out until he gives the word. So I thought, oh, I must see these. And I went to the door, and my mother kept saying, come in, you're not to go. And I said, no, I'll only be a few minutes, come in. Eventually I got out, and I remember looking up, and it was windy, the clouds were going fairly fast, and I could hear them, but I never saw them. Now then, I wondered about these planes. I thought, but why were they coming from the north when Germany is east and flying south? I thought, they've got it wrong somewhere. However, my son was up on on Thursday, eldest son, and I explained to him, and I said, I don't even know the date it was on. And so he got the internet and eventually got it, that it was the 15th of August 1940, and it was just after lunch, which was the time that we were told to get in. Now then, that day was called Black Britain. And why it was called Black Britain was because the quantity of planes that were up and fighting them and coming from other directions. Now then, I had written down how many planes there actually was. Oh, yes, there was 1,000 enemy planes. It's in this book. I found it in there once I found the date. 1,000 enemy planes. 144 of them were shot down, and 27 British fighters were lost. But it was a big event for the airfields in the north, for the fighters, because they didn't have great lot to do, because most of the bombing was at the south. So when this happened, and these German planes flew in their area, they had a lot of work to do. But the reason they were flying from the north, because they came from Norway. They were stationed in Norway and flew down. But apparently, on the internet, it said most of the bombs were dropped in the sea. Now then, from our house, when you looked out of the window, you could see Concert Steelworks, and we couldn't see Newcastle because obviously there was a hill and Newcastle was below. But when the air raids siren went, we could hear everything. We could hear the bombs, the anti-aircraft guns, the searchlights we could see looking for aircraft. So, as a young boy, when I was in my bedroom, I would take the blackout down, but I made sure there was no lights, and I could see all this happening. And then one night, I took the blackout down, and just leaning on the window, and there was the three most biggest explosions. And what it was, they dropped two bombs on Shotley Bridge. One was an oil bomb, and another one to ignite it, to lighten up, you see. What a fright I got. The siren was easy to hear because I think it was in Concert Steelworks, and I think it was operated by steam. So it was a terrific noise right away up the valleys, which was quite easy to hear. But there was often a lot of these air raids at Newcastle. One week we got to know the local policeman at Edmundbyers and the family, but they had to move to Durham because he got a job as a sergeant in the police at Durham. However, they invited my mother and brother and I for a week's holiday, which was quite good of them. We went down. I think it would be the first night the siren went. So, being in the centre of Durham, you couldn't sort of dig the garden and put a shelter up or anything. So they had a big steel table that they used for dining on, but also it was an air raid shelter. You just got underneath. Apparently the table is the safest place in a house. If it collapses or anything happens, it'll all fall over, but you're still. So we were packed in under the table, and the lady of the house kept going out and looking up at the viaduct that goes right over Durham. And I think my mother said, "What is it?" And she says, "Well, if the Germans are going to bomb, that's what they're going to hit, that viaduct, because it'll break the line from London to Newcastle." However, nothing happened. There were some very severe snowstorms in that period, different to what it is now. And I remember Edmundbyers was cut off altogether, and no way of a chance of anybody getting anything at concert or anywhere, except one ex-naval man walked all the way to Shotley Bridge and back and brought a big sort of baggage of yeast for the women to make the bread. So that was quite good. Now then, we were still cut off a week afterwards, so they sent 200 soldiers to come and dig out the road so that we could get out. But all they had was a trench shovel, so you can imagine going along through the snow. And but anyway, they succeeded. Working on the farms in the summer, I had another uncle had a farm, and I used to have to go and help him with his hay. I used to stand on the pike again, build it, and he would fork it up. And I always remember tea time in those days. Tea was brought out, and you just sat down and had a picnic tea, as you might say. But his wife had caraway seeds in everything. And I used to think, oh, lovely tea cakes, but caraway seeds. Anyway, I stuck it out, and on a Sunday night, we used to listen to the radio, and what was on every Sunday night was all the national anthems of the countries that the Germans had overtaken, and then it all was finished with the British national anthem at the finish. And I think we would listen to it nearly every Sunday night. My brother did help the farmer a little bit, and he was only 9 years then, and he used to drive a little tractor for the farmer. It was what you called an Alice Chalmers. It was a very small Alice Chalmers tractor. So, but he drove the tractor for them, and quite enjoyed it, I think. Now then, my most frightening experience. I was, as a young boy, I was just sort of playing this summer day, and somehow I wandered out of the village, but I don't know what I was looking for. And as you go into Edmundbyers, there's like a cutting. So you can't see that side, or the hill goes up, you couldn't see Edmundbyers. And I just sat on the bank side when this car pulled up. Now there was only one man had a car in the village. He was a businessman, I knew him, and I didn't know where this car had come from. I've got it on my iPad, the particular car. It was an Austin 18, 1939, big car, and it pulled up, and the man wound the window down, and in broken German said to me, "Is this the right road to Shotley Bridge?" And of course I said yes, and that was a mistake. He should never have told people, but I was so frightened. As if he'd been English, I would have said, well, you know. And so anyway, when he spoke in German, broken, I thought, oh dear, what have I done? And I thought, why didn't he stop at the village police house and ask them or anybody else? And I assumed that he was a spy. Now then, I've read just recently in those books, there was an awful lot of spies in the Newcastle concert and that area at the time. He even looked like Himmler. He had the horn-rimmed spectacles. So I went straight back up to my mother, told her what I'd done, and so she went to the warden and told him, and I don't know whether you watched Dad's Army or not, but Mandarin, he was just like that, and as much as said, stupid boy. So anyway, that was it. Now, had he had the phone in because he was in the post office. Had he phoned the police at Shotley Bridge, there was only one way in. They could have stopped him and asked him who he was. And to this day, I don't know, but that man's face haunts me yet. And the car, I picked it out on the old, on the iPad there, on the old Austin cars. But nobody believes my story. No, I've just made it up. I haven't, it's up here. But afterwards, after he'd taken all, got to Shotley Bridge, I thought it could be something to do with the bombing of the Steelworks at Concert. But not long after, the Germans dropped incendiaries, but they missed Concert, and that's my grandmother's farm. And on the moors, on the top, on the moors here, is where all the incendiaries dropped and ignited all the moor, missing my grandmother's farm here. All this was on fire. So I assumed that he'd given them information of Concert Steelworks, and that's where they finished up on there. So my friend and I went up next day to have a look around, and in amongst the heather was the fins of a bomb with green paint on, I can remember, and it hadn't gone off, apparently, and it was about that much into the soil. I think the heather broke its fall, and with the result, it was easy to get out. So we pulled it out, and took it to my friend's father, who was the warden, and I don't know what they did with it. Probably gave it to the army to explode or whatever. After that, as I was nearing 14, we moved up to Wark here. As my mother got a job at the on the same estate down here, and she got a free cottage, which was away up in the woods. So that helped. There was no rent to pay, and she was paid so much in wages. And so I got a job when I was 14 in the gardens, the big gardens, and we were mainly growing vegetables, apples, and you name it. And there was a big fruit and veg shop in Wark, and grocers, and they used to buy everything from the garden so that there was fresh fruit and vegetables. We even grew peaches, nectarines, and they didn't sell many of the vines. They used a lot of them themselves. But apples, and I used to take them along, sometimes pick a small sack of sprouts and onto my shoulder and catch the bus up on the road and then take it along to Wark. But I always remember when any new tomatoes came in, I just got into the shop and all the girls at work said, "Oh, I want so many of them, those I want these," so they would never reach the shelf, but they would be paid for. I was still going to the school at Wark for a little bit before I started work, but the headmaster's wife used to do meals for the school. She cooked them and you paid a small amount of money a week and you got your meal. Now then, there was school gardens as well. And another chap and I, or another boy and I, got the job of doing the garden work. So we were busy doing garden work. We had to carry the food down, the cans back, and then there was a little bit of time left for lessons. The first house we lived in, we moved into, this is the third house. The first house was, it had no electric, but there was a water tap at the back, which was all right. It wasn't very big, but we managed all right. But then there was another house on the hilltop, had the electric. So my mother asked, could we have that one? Yes, you can have that one, but no water. So the water supply was a well that was 2 fields, roughly half a mile away, and you had to go over and down a steep bank. And so what you did, you had 2 buckets and a square, about a metre, and when you got your buckets full of water, you turned the square till it was sort of diagonal, and put the 2 sharp edges in on top of the bucket, and you got the handles, and when you pull it, it locks, so you're carrying them like this, and the weight appeared to be half of what it was carrying it down here. But 2 big pails of water would last more than probably 2 days just drinking the water. The other water was collected by the rainwater in a huge tank, which was on the end of the house. And I only remember it running dry once. I used to work on the farm estate at nights and weekends. And at 14, the farm manager said, there's a field quite a distance away, needs to be disked. Go and drive the tractor. So he took me down. I got onto this old Fordson tractor, and the discs were a whole lot of big steel discs, and they cut the soil up as they go down. So then he left me and away to the farm up at Conshield. And I was driving down and looking back and thinking, oh, this is powerful, and I'm pulling this and this. So I was watching this way instead of in front, when all of a sudden there was such ping, ping. And what I'd done was I'd driven through into the wire fence with the front of the tractor. But to get out, there was no forklifts to lift it up, and I had to just boom, 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 until I got it back out again, and then I finished the field. After the house where we had with the no water, we moved down here. But in those days, if you wanted a bath, someone had to book it later on at night after everybody had gone to bed, because you had to have your bath in front of the fire and fill it with the hot water. So you were limited. Wark had a home guard when I got here, and Simonburn along the road. This is really Simonburn parish. And someone got the idea that one summer night it would be a good idea to have a boxing match between Simonburn and Wark. And so as a field, just as you're going into Wark, and the bankside is all sort of like a theatre, and the villagers and everybody sat around there, and the boxing booth was down in the bottom. Well, imagine 2 villages, and so I think I went down here. When it started, the Marquis of Queensberry rules were thrown out of the window, and it was all right to hit a man if he was even sitting on the canvas, which did happen. And one of the Simonburn men hit one of the Wark ones on the canvas, and his brother said to him, if I was you, I wouldn't show my face in Wark anymore. But it was hilarious. There was also dances in the village quite often, or something, to raise money for, well, they used to call it Spitfire Week, Corvette Week, and all the money went towards that. I think that's as far as I've got.
That's great.
Is anything else you want? Any
No, I think you've pretty much covered all the topics I was going to ask about.
Yeah.
It is.
Apparently, the bombing of Tyneside, it's in, I think, one of these books. They did very little bombing of the industries like shipyards. They were bombed, and and they never touched concert works other than maybe trying when these bombs fell around near my grandmother's. But I often wondered if it was that maybe if the Germans did take over Britain, they would still want somewhere where they could carry on.
Yeah.
And really, it says that it's the shortest route from Germany, northern Germany, to Newcastle, as it is going across to Coventry and those places where they bombed and bombed. So there was a reason that avoided Tyneside. But they did bomb because we could hear them at nights at Edmundbyers. But once I moved up here, we never heard a siren, we never heard bombs. It was just, you knew the war was on, but that was it. So, that's it.
What about VE Day?
VE Day, there's a photograph. This one is of me at school at Edmundbyers.
What age were you then in 39?
Oh, I'll be 10. I was born in 29. Yes. And that's my mother's ration book. Oh, I don't know how that one comes. That was me in the army.
When was that?
48. It was still sort of wartime billets and everything. I remember I took ill. I got this, students can pick it up, and in barracks and things, the severe meningitis. And I remember when I woke up in the morning, I just felt absolutely awful. And the lads kept saying to me, you'll have to get up and go on parade or you'll be locked up. I says, I couldn't care less. I can't get out of bed. I was in a state. So anyway, the medical officer came straight away, and I was taken away to a military hospital, Colchester, I think. And wasn't easy. I was ill, but I managed to get a little bit of food down after 1 or 2 days, and after a week the sergeant came and said, right, clean this floor. And it was sort of like a type of floor, and you know, we used to call it oilcloth, but it wasn't that type. And he said, there's a tin of polish, and pop the polish on and get this big block and push it back and forward. Well, I'd never had anything to eat for a week, and so I got a start, and the sweat was come from me, so I sat on the bed. When in walked the sergeant. The swearing that I got, I wouldn't like to repeat it when there's a camera. And eventually I got back to the camp, but I didn't do any work there. I just wandered around for 2 or 3 weeks. But the male nurse said that I was lucky to be alive. He says, you're lucky to have survived it. But when I got back to the camp, all the lads kept saying, oh, after you left, they had to come and fumigate the billet, and the smell was terrific. I said, well, I cannot help it. So that was the VAA Day at Wark, the celebrations. These troops were camped at our dance and were along at Gunnerton. And that is me right on the edge there.
It's a great photo.
Yeah. So there was one. I don't know whether you recognise anybody else, but there was big celebrations. There was probably a dance at night, and so it was something to celebrate.
Yeah, I can imagine.
There was some occasion at Wark, one of these fundraising efforts, and there was no oranges or bananas at the time. And I remember the raffle was one orange, and one of the soldiers had managed to bring it back. And so that was the raffle. So I remember buying a ticket, and I thought, well, I hope I win it. I'll give it to my mother. But I didn't. I didn't win the orange. So, and as I say, these are the splints that the Home Guard used. Well, I hold them in front of the camera. This one was for the leg, one leg, and this one is for the arm. Made from Canadian pine, which was a good wood. And it must be a hardwood because there's no woodworm have ever attacked it. I think that's it. This has nothing to do with it, so you can switch off.
Oh, is it the wrong? Yeah, that'll be right. Yeah, no, that's...
We were all asked to take in evacuees at Edmundbyers. Now then, the house we lived in was 2 bedrooms, but very small. And they came around with this family from Byker, a mother and 2 sons, and there was my mother and myself and brother, which was what we had to do was move from our bedroom and sleep in with our mother, and I suppose vice versa, these other 2. But they were very rough, these evacuees. And I had no idea of the countryside. These 2 boys, there was a field just in front of our house. They got into the field, they chased the sheep, and it doesn't matter how much telling off, they just carried on. To put it mildly, things didn't work between this family and ours. There was, I don't know how they'd managed their cooking, or where they got the money from, or whether my mother had to think, but they only lasted a week, and then they went back to Byker. But it didn't seem to be fair, because the people that were going round with these evacuees and allocating them to different houses, they would come to a house with, say, 2 or 3 bedrooms, and a mother and daughter would be put in. But you can imagine the mother and the daughter with their little ringlets and, you know, everything. And so they were put in with better class. And that's how it went on. But it didn't work. Not at our house, anyway.